Have you ever wondered what happens the moment a gentle soul finally stops bending, stops shrinking, stops sacrificing themselves just to keep the peace? What shifts inside a person who has spent a lifetime softening their voice, hiding their needs, and cushioning the world from discomfort, only to one day whisper to themselves, "No more"? What awakens when the heart that was always giving finally realizes it has been giving itself away? There is a quiet rebellion that rises inside sensitive souls when the exhaustion becomes too heavy to carry, when kindness becomes a burden instead of a gift, when the desire to be good turns into the fear of disappearing. Have you felt it? That subtle ache that grows every time you say yes when your whole being wants to say no. That strange emptiness that comes after pleasing someone who wouldn't do the same for you. That silent resentment you swallow because you fear what might happen if you speak your truth. That deep fatigue, not of the body, but of the spirit, that whispers, "I cannot keep doing this." Sensitive souls try to protect the world, but they rarely protect themselves. They carry the emotions of others like fragile glass, terrified of dropping anyone, terrified of disappointing anyone, terrified of becoming the source of someone else's discomfort. So they trade their boundaries for acceptance. They trade their needs for harmony. They trade their truth for peace that never truly lasts. But beneath that calm surface, something begins to shift. A gentle soul can only be stretched so far before something inside snaps. Not in anger, not in rage, but in awareness. People often mistake gentleness for weakness, softness for submission, compassion for compliance. But a gentle soul is not weak. They are simply patient, deep, and willing. They can endure more than most because they feel more than most. But they too have a limit. And the moment they realize that pleasing everyone is the fastest way to lose themselves, something breathtaking begins to happen. The awakening of self-respect. There comes a point where the soul quietly refuses to be used anymore. A point where being nice becomes a form of self-betrayal. A point where you can no longer carry the emotional weight of others while abandoning the gravity of your own. And in that moment, the gentle soul does something extraordinary. They stop performing for the world and start returning to themselves. What happens then? What becomes of the person who has lived their entire life smoothing the edges of others while cutting themselves on the inside? What unfolds when the heart that always forgave stops accepting pain as its destiny? What shifts when the soul that once whispered finally speaks? This is the moment the story changes, the moment the nice one stops being nice and starts being true. And the world around them will never be the same again. Number one, why gentle souls become people pleasers. Gentle souls do not become people pleasers by accident. There is always a story behind their softness, a history behind their silence, a childhood behind their kindness. Sensitivity may be an inborn gift, but the compulsion to please, that is something the world teaches you. It begins early, often long before you have the language to understand what is happening. Maybe you grew up in a home where your emotions were too much, where your needs were treated as inconveniences, where peace depended on your ability to stay quiet, compliant, agreeable. Maybe you learned that love had conditions, and approval was the reward for obedience. Or maybe you sensed the instability around you, the tension in the air, the unspoken conflicts, the emotional fragility of the adults charged with your care, and you decided, without consciously deciding, to become the one who kept everything from breaking. This is how gentle souls become protectors far too early. They learn to read the emotional weather in a room before they can read the words on a page. They learn that saying yes is safer than saying no. They learn to anticipate the needs of others before noticing their own. And by the time they reach adulthood, people-pleasing feels less like a habit and more like identity. It becomes the way they navigate relationships, avoid conflict, and maintain a sense of belonging. Not because they lack strength, but because pleasing others once kept them emotionally safe. But there is another layer, one deeper than childhood patterns. Sensitive souls feel the emotions of others as if they were their own. When someone is disappointed, they feel the pain of that disappointment. When someone is angry, they absorb the weight of that anger. When someone feels abandoned, they feel the echo of that abandonment inside themselves. And so they try to prevent these emotions in others as a way to soothe the storm inside their own hearts. Their empathy becomes a burden, and their kindness becomes a survival strategy. The world reinforces this pattern, praising gentle souls for being so mature, so understanding, so easy to be around. Beneath the praise is the unspoken truth. People love the version of you that never asks for anything. They love your silence. They love your compliance. They love the way you make everything easier for them. And so you keep giving, keep smoothing, keep softening, because being the nice one is the only role you were ever allowed to play. And yet, gentle souls never question whether this kindness is costing them something. They never ask themselves if they are allowed to take up space, to have needs, to set boundaries, to be imperfect. They fear conflict, not because they are weak, but because conflict feels like emotional chaos. And sensitive souls have already lived through enough chaos. This is why they become people pleasers, because their heart was trained to protect others first, because their empathy makes them feel too deeply, because their childhood taught them that love must be earned, and because the world conditioned them to believe that their softness had value only when it served someone else. But even the gentlest soul eventually realizes that pleasing everyone is slowly destroying the one person they were born to protect, themselves. Number 2, the moment the soul snaps awake, there is a moment in every gentle soul's life when something shifts. Not violently, not dramatically, but unmistakably. A moment when the exhaustion becomes heavier than the fear, when the pain of self-abandonment finally outweighs the discomfort of disappointing others, when you look at your reflection and realize that the person staring back is a stranger shaped by everyone's expectations except your own. This is the moment the soul snaps awake, the moment when the people pleaser dies and the real self begins to emerge. It doesn't happen in a burst of anger. It happens in a quiet, almost sacred clarity. I cannot live like this anymore. A simple sentence, yet it carries the force of an entire lifetime of suppressed truth. This awakening often appears in small decisions first, the subtle shift in energy when you hesitate before automatically saying yes. The pause before you offer help you don't have the capacity to give. The tiny spark of courage when you choose silence instead of immediately fixing someone else's problem. These little moments are not accidents, they are the early tremors of a deeper transformation. The soul is slowly reclaiming what it lost. For years, you carried the weight of being the easy one, the agreeable one, the healing one. You believed your duty was to soften the world. But somewhere inside, your true nature, the one tired of being invisible, begins to rise. It doesn't want to be used. It doesn't want to be drained. It doesn't want to be praised for disappearing. It wants space. It wants honesty. It wants alignment. Awakening is not the discovery of something new. It is the return to something forgotten. And in that return, you begin to feel anger, not destructive anger, but clarifying anger. The kind that says, I deserve the same care I give. You begin to feel grief for all the times you silenced yourself. You begin to feel sadness for all the versions of you who worked so hard to be acceptable. You begin to feel compassion for the self that tried so desperately to be loved. And then, quietly, courage blooms. The courage to say no without apology. The courage to disappoint people who expected your compliance. The courage to set boundaries that protect your softness. The courage to stop explaining yourself. The courage to stop shrinking. People around you may not understand this shift. Some will resist it. Some will accuse you of changing. Claim you've become cold or selfish. But you have not hardened, you have awakened. You have not become cruel, you have become conscious. Those who benefited from your silence will naturally fear your voice. That is inevitable. But the moment you honor yourself, everything in your life begins to rearrange around your newfound truth. Relationships shift. Dynamics break. Patterns dissolve. This is not chaos, it is recalibration. The soul is finally choosing itself. And once this awakening begins, there is no returning to the version of you that lives solely to be useful. That self has done its duty. That self has served its purpose. A new self, a truer self, now steps forward. A self that refuses to be used. Number 3, how people react when you stop being used. The moment a gentle soul stops being available to everyone, the world around them begins to reveal its true nature. Not because you changed into someone harsh, but because your refusal to be used exposes the intentions of those who were comfortably benefiting from your silence. When you stop being the one who always says yes, relationships shift, dynamics wobble, masks slip, and people show you who they were all along. Some will react with confusion. They will look at you as if you've trade an unspoken contract, the contract where you sacrifice yourself for their comfort. They will ask, "What's wrong with you?" Because they have never asked, "What has all this done to you?" They are not used to seeing you choose yourself, and your self-respect will feel like rejection to those who mistook your kindness for obligation. Some will react with anger, because your boundaries disrupt their convenience, because your no takes away the ease they gained from your compliance. These people were not drawn to your soul. They were drawn to your softness, to your willingness to bend. When that bending stops, their frustration reveals just how much they depended on your lack of boundaries. Some will react with guilt, not because they harmed you intentionally, but because your awakening forces them to confront how much they have taken. Your change becomes a mirror held up to their behavior. It shows them the imbalance they never acknowledged, the emotional labor you provided without question. Some will apologize, some will quietly step back. But either way, their discomfort signals that your transformation is working. Some will react with distance. They will fade away, not because you did something wrong, but because without your constant care, they no longer receive what they unconsciously expected. These relationships do not collapse. They simply reveal what held them together, your effort, your availability, your emotional generosity. Without those elements, the connection dissolves, not in tragedy, but in truth. And then, there are those who will react with respect. They will admire your courage to reclaim yourself. They will adjust to your boundaries willingly. They will stay, not because they need something from you, but because they value who you are beyond what you provide. These are the people who were meant to remain in your life, people who see your awakening not as a threat, but as an evolution. When you stop being used, your relationships don't just change, they reorganize themselves around your worth. You begin to notice who speaks to you differently, who listens suddenly, who begins giving instead of only taking. You begin to see who was drawn to your light versus who was drawn to the warmth it provided them. You begin to understand that losing people is not the cost of awakening. Keeping the wrong people was. This phase can feel lonely, but it is a sacred loneliness, the clearing of space for relationships that honor your truth, not your compliance. For connections built on mutual respect, not emotional extraction. For bonds where your gentleness is respected, not exploited. This is what happens when a gentle soul stops being used. the world rearranges itself around the strength you finally allowed yourself to claim. Number 4, how people react when you stop being used. The moment a gentle soul stops being available to everyone, the world around them begins to reveal its true nature. Not because you changed into someone harsh, but because your refusal to be used exposes the intentions of those who are comfortably benefiting from your silence. When you stop being the one who always says yes, relationships shift, dynamics wobble, masks slip, and people show you who they were all along. Some will react with confusion. They will look at you as if you've betrayed an unspoken contract, the contract where you sacrifice yourself for their comfort. They will ask, "What's wrong with you?" because they have never asked, "What has all this done to you?" They are not used to seeing you choose yourself, and your self-respect will feel like rejection to those who mistook your kindness for obligation. Some will react with anger, because your boundaries disrupt their convenience, because your no takes away the ease they gain from your compliance. These people were not drawn to your soul. They were drawn to your softness, to your willingness to bend. When that bending stops, their frustration reveals just how much they depended on your lack of boundaries. Some will react with guilt, not because they harmed you intentionally, but because your awakening forces them to confront how much they have taken. Your change becomes a mirror held up to their behavior. It shows them the imbalance they never acknowledged, the emotional labor you provided without question. Some will apologize, some will quietly step back. But either way, their discomfort signals that your transformation is working. Some will react with distance. They will fade away, not because you did something wrong, but because without your constant care, they no longer receive what they unconsciously expected. These relationships do not collapse. They simply reveal what held them together: your effort, your availability, your emotional generosity. Without those elements, the connection dissolves, not in tragedy, but in truth. And then there are those who will react with respect. They will admire your courage to reclaim yourself. They will adjust to your boundaries willingly. They will stay not because they need something from you, but because they value who you are beyond what you provide. These are the people who are meant to remain in your life. People who see your awakening not as a threat, but as an evolution. When you stop being used, your relationships don't just change, they reorganize themselves around your worth. You begin to notice who speaks to you differently, who listens suddenly, who begins giving instead of only taking. You begin to see who is drawn to your light versus who is drawn to the warmth it provided them. You begin to understand that losing people is not the cost of awakening. Keeping the wrong people was. This phase can feel lonely, but it is a sacred loneliness, the clearing of space for relationships that honor your truth, not your compliance. For connections built on mutual respect, not emotional extraction. For bonds where your gentleness is respected, not exploited. This is what happens when a gentle soul stops being used. The world rearranges itself around the strength you finally allowed yourself to claim. Number 5, the birth of authentic strength. There comes a quiet turning point in the journey of every gentle soul, a moment when the softness that was once exploited transforms into something far more powerful than anyone ever imagined. Not hardness, not coldness, but authentic strength. The kind that arises only when a person learns to honor their own spirit with the same devotion they once gave to everyone else. It is the strength of someone who has walked through the fire of self-abandonment and emerged knowing finally that their sensitivity is not a flaw to hide, but a truth to protect. When you stop letting people use you, your energy begins to shift. You no longer speak from a place of fear. You no longer give from a place of guilt. You no longer shrink from a place of habit. Instead, something steady grows inside you, a rootedness, a clarity, a grounded confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. Your boundaries stop being lines you force into place. They become the natural shape of your soul. You stop asking, is this okay for them? And begin asking, is this true for me? And this simple shift opens an entirely new dimension of inner power. Authentic strength is not loud, it is not aggressive, it does not require dominance or resistance. It is the strength of alignment, the strength of self-awareness, the strength of understanding where you end and others begin. It is the calm ability to say no without trembling, the peaceful knowing that you no longer owe your energy to every voice that demands it. Authentic strength emerges the moment you realize that protecting your peace is not selfish, it is sacred. As you step into this new strength, you begin to speak more honestly. Your words carry weight, not because they are harsh, but because they are real. You no longer apologize for existing. You no longer feel guilty for having needs. You no longer silence your truth to avoid temporary discomfort. You understand now that pleasing others is not the same as loving them, and losing yourself is not the same as being kind. And with this awakening, something else happens. Your relationships begin to evolve. People can no longer manipulate you with guilt. No one can control you with expectations. Who relied on your weakness no longer know how to stand beside your strength. But those who truly care for you, they begin to love you more deeply. They rise to meet you. They adjust. They grow. They see your boundaries not as walls, but as doors, doors that finally open into your true self. For the first time, you begin to attract people who love your authenticity, not the version of you who always made themselves small. This is the birth of authentic strength. The shift from pleasing to honoring, from shrinking to standing, from giving endlessly to giving truthfully, from being the nice one to being the whole one. You are no longer the gentle soul who can be used. You are the gentle soul who finally belongs to themselves. And now, as the journey comes to rest, you can feel it, the quiet transformation that has taken place within you. The soft but steady shift from a life lived in service of others' comfort to a life aligned with your own truth. You begin to realize that this entire path, from people-pleasing to awakening, was never about becoming harder. It was about becoming whole. A gentle soul does not stop being gentle when they refuse to be used. Something far more extraordinary happens. They begin to offer their softness from a place of strength rather than sacrifice. Look at how far you've come. Once you lived with a heart that bent for everyone but yourself. Once you accepted exhaustion as the price of belonging. Once you mistook compliance for kindness, silence for peace, self-erasure for love. But now you know better. You know that the world does not need another person who disappears, another soul who diminishes themselves for the sake of keeping everything together. The world needs people who live truthfully, people who are gentle and rooted, soft and sovereign, compassionate and conscious of their own worth. A gentle soul becomes powerful not by tightening their grip, but by loosening the chains that once bound them to other people's expectations. You are no longer driven by the fear of rejection. You no longer carry the weight of needing to be liked by everyone. You no longer shape yourself into what others find convenient. There is a freedom in this, a freedom that settles into your bones like warm light. It is the freedom of finally belonging to yourself. As you stop pleasing others, something remarkable happens. Your relationships become real. The ones built on taking fall away naturally. The ones built on mutual respect grow stronger. And the ones built on truth reveal themselves as anchors in your evolution. You begin to attract people who value your boundaries, who appreciate your depth, who don't confuse your kindness for weakness. People who love not the version of you who always says yes, but the version who says yes only when it is honest. These connections feel different, calmer, cleaner, more authentic. They arise from a place of equality rather than emotional extraction. But perhaps the greatest transformation is the one that happens within. You begin to trust your own inner voice again, the voice you once silenced to keep others comfortable. You begin to hear your intuition clearly, the guidance that was drowned out by the noise of everyone else's needs. You begin to feel your own presence, the presence that was lost in years of being the nice one. And in this clarity, you discover something profound. Your gentleness was never the problem. Your lack of boundaries was. You were never too soft. You were simply too willing to abandon yourself. But now you have returned to your own energy, return to your own truth, return to your own spirit. A gentle soul who refuses to be used does not become unkind. They become awake to their worth, awake to their needs, awake to their sacred responsibility to protect the light within them. This is the true power of the gentle soul, not in pleasing everyone, but in honoring themselves so deeply that only the right people remain.